Hello, I'm Guile, and I got to play in the Street Fighter 6 beta just last weekend. But first off, who even am I? I'm a pretty big fighting game fanatic, and I'm mainly playing Guilty Gear Strive right now, currently ranked as a top 40 Axel on rating update. I don't play Street Fighter that much and aren't as good at it comparatively. I have a C rank in 3rd Strike on Fight Kid using Remy and Alex. Play Ultra Street Fighter 4 a ton, but I'm kinda ass at it anyway, and straight up skip 5. Nevertheless, I was, and still am very excited for 6, and was lucky enough to get selected for the beta, and my fundamentals were definitely enough to provide me with a good time. For gameplay mechanics, I'm interested with the concept of using drive gauge as a resource for system mechanics, EX or I guess OD moves, and also as a guard bar. This is really unprecedented and honestly not something I would have expected from a mainline game like Street Fighter. However, from not having played the game before, there seems to be almost an overload of mechanics, too much to the point where they just seem to be there to serve as homages, rather than actually intending to serve gameplay functions. The amount of drive gauge each mechanic costs also feels arbitrary, and at a glance feels kind of messy. Drive impact in particular seemed to be very strong too, and note, this is an opinion from a player who's barely seen gameplay, considering it's only one bar and has pretty big returns if successful, which doesn't seem too difficult. I've also heard people complain about drive gauge refilling completely between rounds, and how that makes drive impact a very brain-dead round start. Compared to the characters themselves, which I was very excited for, I was envisioning the system mechanics to be the main gripe I'd have with the beta if I did have any. But enough talk, let's get into the beta experience. There are 3 main characters I was gunning for in this beta: Ken, Guile, and Jamie. Ken is my co-main in 4, and footage indicated that he's looking sick in 6 as well, so I just had to try him. I'm generally not too inclined to choose Shotos immediately, but I enjoy the quote-unquote cool ones, mainly those who deviate from the formula. I was excited to see how Ken would do so, and with his newly added Jinrai kicks I had high expectations, and they were fulfilled. I had so much fun with his new additions that he was by far the character I had the most hours in. For normals, some have changed, but in a way I prefer. Standing medium kick is now a high angled poke with a target combo that looks quite good. This, in addition to standing heavy kick, means Ken's got great pokes, even if they are susceptible to drive impact if done carelessly. Ken's V-skill run is now on a 2-kick button input, and it has overhead and step kick follows, which replaces the old corresponding command normals. I found this run to be incredibly fun, especially when you can cancel into it from normals, and considering certain specials get powered up from run, the resemblance to Naoto Kuragane's Blaze Blue, my profile picture, certainly kept me invested. His Hadokens are surprisingly solid too. I'm pretty sure his regular version has the exact same frame data as Ryu's, meaning the potential drawback of weaker zoning doesn't even feel as prevalent here. I absolutely love Jinrai kicks, and the different strength versions of the initial kick and follow-ups all seem very well made and designed. It reminded me a lot of Anji's Fujin and Rufus's Messiah kick, and it'd be pretty funny if Ken's inspiration really was from his unfriendly rival. It's already incredibly fun for mix-ups, but the fact that kick loops from juggles exist as well just brings its awesomeness to the next level. Dragon Lash Kick was a move I didn't know existed until the beta. Sick name and great for side switches when using the enhanced run or OD version, but it just feels like a bonus rather than a necessary tool to me, which is still fine. Ken's supers are all beautiful and also probably the most basic set in the game, but they surprisingly all have their unique uses and aren't redundant at all. In short, Ken's ease of use in tandem with how interesting he is made me fall in love instantly, but even more as I played him. I wouldn't be surprised if I do end up maining him. I'm a huge fan of charge characters, so I naturally wanted to play Guile, especially when I play him or Charlie in certain games already. I didn't want to go as far as to main him though, and doubted I would anyway due to the new Just Frame Sonic Boom mechanic, which I probably wouldn't be able to do consistently. I'm also aware he was very solid in 5, something I'm not used to with Ultra Street Fighter 4 Guile, and expected Capcom to tone him down. Expectations were certainly defied with this character. First off, the Just Frame Boom is incredibly easy, to the point where getting non-Just Frame is actually more difficult. Guile also feels incredibly solid like his Street Fighter 5 counterpart, sporting good normals, a lot of target combos, huge range on his flash kick, and unsurprisingly, booms are great. Especially with Sonic Blade now being a probably permanent addition to his kit, his zoning and approach game using booms is top notch. His install level 2 super in Solid Puncher also means this character has tons of untapped potential. Personally, I wish the Just Frame Boom had a stricter window. It feels like it's probably roughly a 3-frame window right now. If it was stricter and with more reward, I think it'd be more interesting, whereas currently I'm not really considering it much, plus I'd also regain the excuse to not main Guile. Nevertheless, people in the beta have already done crazy things with the character. I personally won't play him, but it'll be cool to see what he can do. This newcomer is just so sick, man. When I saw Jamie in the Street Fighter 6 announcement trailer, I fell in love instantly. The franchise has already gone on for too long without any Drunken Fist practitioners, but you're telling me he also combines it with breakdancing? You couldn't sell me this idea more. Heck, I was so excited I bust out the good old sketchbook for a quick draw. His drinking mechanic is also something very new to the Street Fighter franchise, which is a good thing. It reminds me a bit of Susanoo from BlazBlue. Unfortunately, I figured this technical aspect might prevent me from playing him seriously just owing to the fact that I'm not a fan of labbing technical stuff, but I was determined to at least try him anyway. After doing so, I'm not sure how to feel. His kit feels both unique and orthodox at the same time. His normals feel kinda different from standard Street Fighter characters. For example, he has a multi-hit heavy punch and a cancelable fast heavy kick poke. But without a lot of drinks, he feels quite honest and very standard, which does make sense. He gains new specials with each drink level, which may initially seem like it poses a learning barrier. But in truth, if you want to play competitively, you've got to memorize them anyway for the matchup. They're also not too bad to keep track of. On top of Jamie's drinking mechanic, Rekka's DP, and basically a dash punch. He also gets a dive kit at level 1 drink, breakdance kick combo ender at level 2, command grab at level 3, and enhanced properties on the Rekka and dash punch at level 4. He also gains a target combo at each level, but I am not good enough to memorize their inputs, much less utilize them. Despite the seemingly straightforward nature of his specials, I have a hard time utilizing him effectively, likely in large part due to his unorthodox normals. You really should only get drinks on knockdowns or via the level 2 install, but even with most players in the beta not good enough to punish raw drink, I could not really utilize Jamie's new abilities that well. I do know he gains a lot of stuff like a plus on block overhead, and pretty crazy looking damage, especially when he can combo off his super art version of level 3. I honestly probably just spent too little time in him during the beta, as I think he's probably not that hard, and more so just different from the standard. With the strengths he gains at higher drink levels, and in my opinion not too high difficulty in gaining them, I can definitely see Jamie being a high tier character, one that I aim to use more once I get access to the game again. I didn't play the other characters too much, so I'll go through them quickly. I haven't played Luke in Street Fighter V before, but I know of his notoriety. I actually find him quite likable in Street Fighter 6, and it seems like he's a lot more tame, with some people considering him the worst character in the beta. I think he's fun, but his clearly for beginners design is a bit off-putting personally. I wanted to see how Ryu deviated from the Shoto formula as did Ken, but wasn't too impressed. Likely to compensate for Ken now having the same standard Hadouken, Ryu now has a buff he can apply via down-down punch to buff his next Hadouken or Hashogeki, which in my opinion feels kind of roundabout and not the cleanest design. I was initially a bit excited to see Hashogeki, but in contrast to Jinrai Kick, it just feels so much less unique that I really don't care about it much. I do know that Ryu does a lot of damage, even off stuff like non-full connect level 3, but I wish he'd be more mechanically interesting, though not a bad design by any means. I basically didn't play the female characters at all since they were the most technical, Chun being the least difficult meant I tried her most, and I'm actually delighted to see how her very neutral base kit still feels very effective, while she's gained more technical tools via her stance. Surprisingly, I barely saw her being played in the beta, but I might try her out a bit more in the future. Kimberly, in contrast, was probably the most popular character, and I initially thought she might be the strongest in the beta roster. After trying her, it does feel like her kit is mostly filled with gimmicks, which people will deal with better with time. But they mostly still work very well on a fundamental level, especially when she has the ability to use spray cans at play, so I still see her as high tier. Juri is apparently the people's consensus on the strongest character, which I admittedly didn't recognize until I played against good ones. Fuha stocks are relatively easy to stock, and Juri conversions are quite solid overall, with what I've seen from her apparently being able to link off the overhead kick special from quarter circle forward medium kick. With all the feet fan service Street Fighter 6 is giving in addition to this, Juri mains are definitely eating. Well, opinions on characters are great and all, but I'm sure many of you aren't even thinking about them and more so the system mechanics, specifically the hot topic on the block, Drive Impact. I already recognized it was an issue after playing a guy consistently using Drive Impact while I was still playing the regular neutral poking game since Friday night. It was already very obvious that there would be a lot of counterplay, jumping, throwing, parrying, multi-hits, some reversals, supers.
but it was still clearly going to be a centralizing mechanic nevertheless that one constantly needed to look out for. And the fact that its best answer was actually itself only further sold that point. It's also crazy that it only costs 1 drive gauge when it frequently felt even more rewarding than OD moves that cost 2. And its armor properties initially made me feel that I'd just rather use this over drive parry in most situations, since it'd be likelier to gain reward from drive impacting instead. In fact, it initially felt so bad that it made me reconsider if I wanted to buy a Street Fighter 6 on launch after all. Would I play a game with this kind of centralizing mechanic in it? As an Ultra Street Fighter 4 lover, I foresaw people calling complainers scrubs via making the comparison to Focus Attack, the latter of which I love. What makes Drive Impact look so bad then, when they're both slow armored mids? Just a bit of thinking makes it obvious. Non-red Focus only has 1 hit of armor in contrast to DI, which has 2, meaning it's not really a good option while receiving frame traps, while the latter is more feasible. Focuses generally also have low reward unless you charge to at least level 2, while DI can cause crumples a lot more easily, which will lead to higher reward. DI being basically still rewarding on block, while being an unblockable in the corner are traits Focus Attack does not have as well unless you charge it for half a year, which is much longer. So really, while there are similarities, this comparison is not good, with Focus Attack really working more like a neutral tool and DI being kind of a gimmicky mix-up with generally greater returns. Even comparison to other slow universal moves like Guilty Gear's Dust aren't great when usually they can just be mitigated by blocking correctly, while you specifically need to input a move in response to Drive Impact, which is generally harder to react with and may not even be available if you're in Burnout. But as I've been playing, it's more and more apparent how DI tests fundamentals, specifically the aspects of reactions. The move itself is definitely reactable, meaning that you just need to DI back whenever they do it. Especially when you can cancel into it from cancelable normals, this means your opponent could tank a hit with their own DI, and you could still DI anyway, effectively meaning you don't want to be the first to DI, and if that's the case, it won't be nearly as prevalent, which you can see in the clips of top players currently online, where that mechanic's actually not used too much. This also further differentiates cancelable versus non-cancelable moves. For example, Ken's standing heavy kick might have more range, but it cannot cancel into DI while crouching medium kick can, making the latter safer, which is genuinely interesting. Same goes for the effects of multi versus single hit moves, since the former will break DI. This is a trait shared with Focus Attack that's one of the main reasons I love that mechanic. I have come to appreciate it more, but I still wouldn't call myself a fan due to its over-centralization. It still feels like a gimmick and will create a wall for many new players, in which the argument for needing good reactions actually does hold more water now. Drive parry definitely feels even weirder when you think about it more. There is no chip damage anyway in cases where you can drive parry, so there seems to be very little reward for using it, with at most just a bit less drive gauge spent. Unsurprisingly, its strength mainly lies within the perfect parry, but it has more utility than you might expect. It's a good option during frame traps since parries tank everything except throws, and since Drive Impact is much worse at higher level as a defensive option, Drive Parry becomes much more useful there. While they're clearly still homages to old system mechanics, it seems like they might be more intentionally designed than they seem after all. I haven't utilized Drive Rush at all to comment on it, but its damage output looks high, which is unsurprising and should be the case anyway for standard Roman cancel-esque mechanics. Drive Reversal is your standard alpha counter. I personally think it's not that useful when you have the other mechanics, but there's no harm. OD specials are just like the EX specials you know and love. Round start with full drive gauge also means players are instantly granted with resources, which can be very fun as both a player and spectator to see when high damage resource spending combos are possible even at round start. I do also enjoy how Burnout works, where you're still able to burn as much drive gauge as you want prior to it, and the fact that Dizzy's, a mechanic that's a bit of a relic, is a lot more intentionally designed as a punishment for poor meter management rather than just making you lose more because you already were. While my expectations of having problems mainly with the system held true, I'm appreciating more and more as time goes on. Do I think there should be any changes? Ultimately, most likely, but I would prefer for that to not happen before actual launch for there to be more public input. I do think that Drive Impact costing only 1 drive gauge is too cheap, and would personally raise the cost to 1.5 or 2, but with the gimmicky nature of the mechanic, I could even see pro players just never using it for being too risky while still expensive. This is the same reason I would not nerf Drive Impact. It wouldn't really be the same without its current strength and flaws, including the unblockable in the corner. I think drive reversal could afford a cost decrease to 1 drive gauge, though I'm not sure. And while I think round 1 starting with full drive gauge is fun and exciting, I do think not refilling between rounds would likely be more interesting, since otherwise there's no reason not to spend all your drive gauge resources on a killing combo every time, even if it means it'll look less cool as a spectator. In short, the system may seem messy, but the design seems surprisingly intentional and thought out. Doesn't necessarily mean it'll be enjoyable for all, especially with its beginner unfriendliness, but I think mid and high level play will look quite fun.
In short, I went in excited for Street Fighter 6, became not as enthusiastic for a bit because of drive impact, and left feeling excited again. The system mechanics are far from perfect, but it's definitely interesting, and I respect Capcom for their experimentation, even and especially if it may mean poor accessibility, something modern fighting games are incredibly scared to do, and the fact that reception was still amazing says something. My reactions are not the best, but they'll be good enough to enjoy the drive impact meta, especially considering my awareness of counterplay. Even the roster of 8 in this beta legitimately felt like a full-on game, which goes to show how great the final product will be. I'm already very happy with characters like Ken and Jamie, but there are even more like Lily that I'm excited for. Street Fighter 6 is definitely a day one purchase for me. Thanks for watching, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm planning to release a Strive guide through Axolo's perspective, so stay tuned.